Hi everyone, this is May Park. Today I'm going to show you how to create a one-layer floral watercolor card using Altenew Spring Day stamp set and Watercolor 36 pen set. So I'm going to show you very easy and quick watercoloring technique, but still I'm going to show you how to add interest and depth to your watercolor image that anyone can do. I'm also going to show you my craft desk at the end of this video, so make sure to watch the video to the end. So I really hope you find this video helpful and let's dive in. These are the main supplies that I'm going to use in today's video. Watercolor 36 pen set and Spring Date stamp set from Altenew. This beautiful set of 36 vibrant watercolor hot pens coordinates perfectly with Altenew inks. They are intensely pigmented, fade minimally when drying, and some colors have lovely granulating effects. This watercolor pen set comes with a fine watercolor brush, but you can also buy different sizes of watercolor brush in the Altenew store. I'm going to start by filling my watercolor brush with clean water. I have used the watercolor brush only a couple of times before for watercoloring. For some reason, I feel more comfortable with using a regular watercolor paintbrush. However, I decided to challenge myself today and use Altenew watercolor brush to color my floral images from start to finish. You can use the lid from the watercolor plastic case for palette for color mixing, but I'm going to use Altenew watercolor palette to mix my paints today. This is a medium size, but you can also find a large watercolor palette in the Altenew store. By the way, if you buy Altenew Watercolor 36 pen set, it comes with an empty pen case as a free gift for limited time. I think this empty pen case is good for storing any extra watercolor pens or any of the other mixed media. When it comes to watercoloring, it's important to choose a high quality watercolor paper. Today I'm going to use my favorite watercolor paper, Artist Cold Press 140 pound watercolor paper, which has textured rough side. I'm cutting down my watercolor paper to 4¼ inch by 5½ inches using Timo's paper trimmer. This trimmer is one of my favorite paper crafting tools. It cuts paper like butter. I'm going to use my original Misty stamping tool as I know I will need to stamp my images a few times at the same position. I placed my watercolor panel inside the Misty stamping tool and I'm using magnets to hold the paper in place. If you are not good at masking technique, I highly recommend that you test out the placement of each image by stamping the images on A2 size scratch paper. That way you'll know which image you should stamp first to place it in the foreground. I'm going to pull out the large date stamp from the spring date stamp set and position it on my paper. After picking up the stamp with the misty door, I'm going to ink up my stamp with VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which is waterproof ink, and stamp it on the bottom right corner of my panel. I didn't get a good clean impression on some of the stamping because of the texture on the watercolor paper. So I'm going to ink up the stamp again with the same black ink and stamp the image again. I'm making sure that I transfer my image well on the paper by pressing the misty door hard with even pressure. Then I'm going to dry the paper with my heat tool to prevent from ink smudging. Because VersaFine Onyx Black ink is pigment, which means the ink takes the time to dry. I'm going to stamp the same image on a post-it note to create a mask. You can use Inkado masking paper if you want. I'm going to cut out the image on the post-it note with my scissors. I recommend that you cut slightly inside of the stamping line. That way you can get more perfect stamping while masking the images. I'm going to layer my mask over the stamped image on my panel, covering the image completely. By the way, my post-it note has a full adhesive on the back, so I don't need any glue to place it on my panel. Next, I'm going to stamp the medium-sized flower, positioning the image partially onto the mask. The reason I stamped the large flower first is that I want to place my large flower in the foreground while having small flowers and leaves partially behind the large flower. Stamping the large image first also helps me find the placement of other images with balance. I'm going to continue stamping and masking until I finish creating my own floral arrangement. Masking takes time, but once you remove all the masks, you can see the beauty of the masking technique. If you want to create a soft look of watercoloring, you can stamp the images with embossing ink and heat emboss them with white embossing powder. Especially if you're in the beginner level of watercoloring, heat embossed image will help you stay inside the outline while watercoloring. Or you could stamp the images with a light color of water-based ink for no-line watercoloring. But here I'm stamping my images with black ink to create intense outlines. Since I know where to stamp my sentiment, here I'm stamping my flowers and leaves first and reserve some space for my sentiment. If you don't have a sketch for your card design, I recommend that you stamp your sentiment first and add your images around the sentiment later. Once my stamping is done, I'm going to remove the masks to reveal my floral arrangement and dry my paper with heat tool to make sure the ink is completely dry. By the way, I use alcohol prep pads to clean my stamps and misty door. I bought a pack of alcohol prep pads from Costco, and this pad helps me clean my stamps perfectly without any ink left. I've been using this cleaning method for a few months since I watched Jennifer McGuire using it. A few people told me that this alcohol pad would ruin the clear stamps, but I don't see a problem yet using the alcohol pads to clean my stamps. Now it's time for watercoloring. I'm going to wet my paints by spraying the water using a misty bottle, but you don't have to do this if you're not going to use many colors. I already taped down my watercolor paper on the Altenew watercolor palette using washi tape. When it comes to watercoloring, there are many ways to watercolor images. Today, I'll be showing you a quick and easy way to watercolor your floral images and share a couple of tips on how to add interest and depth on your images. Once I pick up some citrus first from my watercolor pen set with my watercolor brush, I'm applying the color for the base layer. I'm loosely watercoloring each petal with less pigment and lots of water. You can start by wetting your watercolor paper first with clean water if you want. Then I'll be bringing in more color with fresh lemon, which is one shade darker than previous color. I'm applying fresh lemon to the bottom of each petal and where two petals meet together to indicate the shading areas before the previous layer is dry. Next, I'm going to go over the paint to diffuse the color using my watercolor brush by adding a bit of water to the paint. Please note that I'm leaving some white areas to indicate the highlights on the petals. Next, I'm going to let my yellow flower air dry and move on to my second flower. I'm squeezing the barrel of my watercolor brush to make the water out and wipe off the paint using a paper towel. I'll be coloring my second flower with cotton candy for the first layer. While the paper is still wet, I'm going to bring coral berry to add more color to my petals. To create a gradient look of the color, it's important to remove the paint from your watercolor brush and add a bit of water in between before you pull out the color. I'm applying a stroke using very little water and more pigment. This time I'm using Ruby Light. Before the stroke is dry, I'm going to take my watercolor brush and pull the color out from the darker stroke. Each time I pick up the pigment with my watercolor brush, I'm scribbling my watercolor brush pen on my watercolor palette to make sure I get even paint on my brush tip. You can also test out the color on a scrap watercolor paper to see the actual color. If you let the color dry between applications, we'll leave harsh lines between layers. If you don't like those harsh lines, you can soften the hard edges using a water brush even after the paint is already dry. If you look at the flower in real life, you can see that the flower don't have only one color. Adding different color is a great way to create some interest to your image as long as you use the same color family. So I'll be adding a hint of orange on my yellow flower using Sunkist and a hint of yellow on my pink flower using fresh lemon. I'm going to add tiny dots to add interest and shading on my petals using more pigment and less water. If you added too much pigment onto your image, you can pick up the color using a paper towel. If you make a mistake with your watercolors or you have some paint went outside the outline, you can fix it by adding some clean water on the paper and picking up the colors with a paper towel or paintbrush. Just paint in the shape you'd like to lift out using clean water and dab away the water with a paper towel. Now I'm going to turn on some music and speed up the process so you can watch me color. To bring attention to my colorful flowers, I decided to color my entire background using watercolor wash technique. You can achieve more organic look when you use lots of water this time. By the way, I'm using industrial diamond from Altenew Watercolor 36 pen set. You could use a light blue color if you want to create a sky background. My coloring is finished now, and I'm going to clean my watercolor brush and watercolor palette using a paper towel. Then I used my heat tool to dry my watercolor panel. Next, I'll be mounting my watercolor panel on the A2 size top folding white card base using double-sided tape. You could use Altenew glue tape if you want, but strong adhesive like this double-sided tape helps your watercolor paper stay flat and sturdy. To add interest, I'm going to splatter the background with Altenew ink sprays, jet black and pure white. Before adding the splatters, I'm covering my images with post-it notes to protect them from ink splatters. This splatter technique is a bit random but can create some very fun results. So I strongly recommend you give it a try if you haven't done it yet. If you want to create more small controlled splatters, you could pick up the ink from the ink spray bottle using a small paintbrush and tap the body of your paintbrush with your fingers. Make sure to dry the previous splatters using a heat tool before you add the next splatters using a different color to avoid the colors mixing up together. I'm going to add dots by picking up the ink using a tip of my jewel picker. This is a great way to create a look of the controlled splatters if you are not good at creating splatters. Once my background is done, I'm going to dry my panel again using a heat tool. However, I recommend that you set your panel aside for about 10 to 20 minutes to let it air dry. Then your splatters will dry so beautifully without breaking out. Now it's time to open my sentiment. I'm going to pull out the sentiment from Altenew's Smile More stamp set and place it on my watercolor panel. I'm using my Misty stamping tool again because I don't want to make a mistake on stamping as I already spent too much time on watercoloring the images. After stamping my main sentiment, I'm going to stamp my second sentiment with the first fine onyx black ink. I really love this sentiment. It's perfectly okay to be imperfect. I think this sentiment is perfect for my watercolor card, especially with massive but controlled paint splatters. To fix my stamping and enhance the color, I'm going to color my sentiment with my black Sharpie pen. To finish off my card, I'll be stamping the sentiment inside my card and another sentiment on the back of my card using my all-time favorite stamp set, which is Altenew Crafted Life stamp set. My watercolor paper got warped from watercoloring and heat tool. So I'm going to cover my watercolor card with a print paper and place it under some heavy book overnight to make it flat. This is it for today. If you have any questions, please leave comments below and I would be happy to answer them for you. I hope this video tutorial inspires you to create a one-layer floral card using watercoloring. If you enjoyed my video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And I'd love it if you subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss any new videos from me. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time with another video. Bye bye!